First up is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I'm old-fashioned when it comes to assigning blame to military conflict. I blame the aggressor. In this case, obviously, the blame is on Putin, who is engaged in this unprovoked act of aggression, as President Biden has said. We should, though, as Americans, take heed of the international situation that encouraged Putin to take this outrageous act in invading Ukraine and causing one of the most serious crises in Europe in 60 some odd years. This crisis is erupted in part because of Western fecklessness. Is that the right word? Fecklessness. The corruption of Europe and the United States, the corruption of the Biden administration, the odd priorities here in America that puts national security and strength second to ideological obsessions, especially in the military with CRT and the crazed focus on anything but warfighting in the military. And of course, we had Biden's personal corruption issues. You know, one of the things the media won't tell you about that I've been trying to inform you about is the corruption that I believe has encouraged Putin to take this outrageous act. And again, I blame Putin, but I also want to hold accountable our government for its incompetence and corruption that helped create the opportunity here for Putin to take. And you know, look, let's go back before I start talking about Biden personally or Biden administration generally. Let's take a step back. I want you to consider the trillions of dollars we've spent on our national defense, on our foreign policy initiatives, on foreign aid in Europe and elsewhere, on our national security establishment, the CIA, the NSA, et cetera. Think of the trillions that we've just spent even only in the last 20 years or so, all of which were designed to prevent the exact situation that we're facing today. This unprovoked war, this war of aggression by Russia in the heart of Europe. And I don't know where it's going to lead, but these are dangerous times. And we spent all of this money to prevent this type of activity by Russia in terms to ensure the security of Europe generally and to avoid warfare. And it failed. And our deep state has failed miserably in that regard. Specifically with respect to Joe Biden, as I highlighted to you last week, we have these personal corruption issues that I'm sure has led Putin to view the America as a weakened, corrupt entity that is not to be taken seriously. He has seen what we have seen. The media won't talk about it, but you know about it, which is the activities of Hunter Biden in Russia. In Russia. Remember, he got money from the wife of a deceased oligarch of Russia. I think $3.5 million was transferred to one of his entities. And of course, he had that deal with Burisma. And Burisma, as I've pointed out, is a Ukrainian company that is Russia-centric. So the Russians had the Biden family in their back pocket in some respects. Now, do you think Putin wasn't aware of that? And on top of that, we had the Ukrainian government being used as a plaything by the deep state in trying to get Trump, trying to attack Americans, which further fed Russia propaganda that Ukraine was a tool of the United States. And the reckless disregard for the sovereignty of Ukraine by the mandarins at the State Department, like Ambassador Yovanovitch and folks like that, have helped precipitate this. Remember, just over 2 years ago, Judicial Watch uncovered that the Trump administration, actually, was the State Department run by Ambassador Yovanovitch, the same crew that tried to impeach Trump for highlighting the very issues I'm talking about. What were they doing in the Ukrainian embassy, our embassy in Ukraine? Monitoring and spying on American citizens by monitoring their social media posts, contrary to federal privacy law, about what people were saying about Ukraine, Biden, Burisma, the Clinton campaign, Soros, who was another big player in Ukraine in terms of the using Ukraine as a plaything for an ideological agenda. And they were tracking the social media posts of people like the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, Fox News personalities like Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and Lou Dobbs, Jack Posobiec. Who else? John Solomon, the president's son. So that's what our embassy was doing in Ukraine. Rather than doing their work, they were doing spy operations against their political opposition here at home. And we're surprised that Putin saw this, takes a look at this corruption. He knew what was going on. And this is the unhappy result, the deadly result of our incompetence and our corruption here. And, I blame Putin. To be clear, I blame Putin. But Putin is reacting to the opportunities that are presented to him, and he makes calculations based on what he is seeing here in America and elsewhere. And he's seeing a corrupted administration whose chief executive, the president of the United States, has been compromised ethically by his sons and his own involvement in shakedown operations in Ukraine and elsewhere. And you think he obviously has not been intimidated by anything Biden has said. And we have to ask, why is that? Why is that? So I don't know what we're going to do about Ukraine. I don't have the solution other than, policy-wise, we have to recognize that the green energy agenda is a threat to our national security. So to the degree we are more energy dependent, either here or in Europe, on Russia, obviously that makes it harder to confront Russia aggression. And the reason that we are more dependent on Russia energy is because, especially in Europe, they've curtailed their own domestic energy production, again, pursuing this extremist green agenda. Same here at home, where the United States government is going to war against energy producers in a way that makes us more dependent on outside sources of energy as opposed to the tremendous wealth of energy that we have here at home that can be exploited by our own people. So we've got this corruption crisis that's metastasized into this international security crisis. We have to call it as we see it. But the media doesn't want to talk about it. The Republicans don't even want to talk about it. So Judicial Watch is going to continue to investigate the Biden corruption with respect to Ukraine and Russia, and China, and everywhere else. The Biden family has leveraged Joe Biden's power, office, improperly for personal financial advantage. And not just something that is distasteful, something that potentially is illegal in terms of misuse of public office and hiding resources and monies that have come in. Because right now there's a criminal investigation of Hunter Biden into conduct that, according to publicly available evidence from his laptop and other witnesses, implicates his father. And yet there's been no special counsel. So I tell you, if we had held accountable the Biden administration from the get-go, we might have had a different result. And if we had understood, and I mean we generally, because the media has been corrupted, but we must understand the impeachment of Donald Trump is as important to what's happening in Ukraine today as anything else. Because as I said, Trump knew what was going on and he wanted to stop it. And his punishment was, you can't expose Obama, Biden, Clinton corruption and Ukraine's role in that. It's so terrible, we have to impeach you over it and destroy you. That's how desperate they were. So put that in your proverbial pipe and smoke it as you consider the current crisis in Ukraine. Let's pray for the innocents who are losing their lives and those who are bravely defending themselves against this monstrous act of aggression by Putin. But let's not be naive that we put Ukraine in this position in part, and now the consequences are for Ukraine the reap, and as our corrupt political class looks on with virtually no accountability, but from Judicial Watch.
Next up, we go from Russia to China. And as I said, the corruption is just endemic in this city. I am not concerned about the COVID pandemic. I am concerned about the pandemic related to government corruption. And it's in all of our federal agencies, including agencies that before COVID no one really thought much about, which are our federal public health agencies. Now, you may recall that Judicial Watch has had a series of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits and related disclosures about COVID, and specifically the Fauci agency and other agencies' roles early on in handling the pandemic, what they knew and when about the China's involvement and for good and bad in the pandemic, gain of function research, issues about the vaccines. We're covering the gamut. Judicial Watch is doing much more in the way of investigations, and we've gotten out much more information about gain of function and everything else related to the COVID pandemic at the national level than Congress has done, and frankly anyone else has done. I mean, when I look at the scope of materials we've released, it's really quite remarkable. And sure enough, we've gotten new documents from an ongoing lawsuit that we've had since, when did we file this lawsuit? I guess we filed it last year. And we wanted all records for communications contracts and agreements with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And obviously we wanted information about the NIH grants that benefited the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 2 years, and I suspect not many of you who follow Judicial Watch are under the rock dwellers, you know the Wuhan Institute of Virology is a Chinese communist-controlled lab that may or may not have been involved in gain-of-function research. Well, actually, the documents show it was involved in gain-of-function research, funded in part with Fauci's agency's money. And the other big question is, did that gain-of-function research or other research, the tools of which U.S. taxpayers help subsidize, result in the manufacture or creation of the COVID-19 virus? There's a big debate as to whether the virus is naturally occurring and that's how it emerged and infected the human population, versus it being manufactured or engineered in a way and then it escaped from a lab, either Wuhan or somewhere else, and resulted in the epidemic. Judicial Watch has uncovered records from Fauci's agency that show that China was no friend of transparency early on in the pandemic. And this information has been withheld from the American people for over 2 years. The records show that China withheld key information about COVID and how it was spreading from their alleged colleagues in the international health community, including NIH. And this information could have helped us protect America better, and frankly, everyone else in the world. The documents show that in 2020, China was withholding the COVID information I'm talking about. So this is the early part of January 2020. It was a little bit less than a month after it was officially acknowledged by China that there was something up. And this is a State Department document that was produced to us by Fauci's agency's people that show that they knew, because they are passing along and discussing in the document, that China was not a good friend here. The document shows that on January 8th, Dr. Ping Cheng, P-I-N-C-H-E-N, now she's a very important person, probably the most important person in this debate that you haven't heard anyone talk about other than Judicial Watch, because she was Fauci's top person in China during much of the COVID outbreak, certainly when it first emerged. So I didn't know this until I saw her in Judicial Watch documents, that Fauci's agency, the National Institute for Allergic and Infectious Diseases, had a representative, a permanent person, practically speaking, there in China, working with Wuhan and kind of engaging in half-baked spy operations while they were actually funding them. So they were concerned about Wuhan while funding it. It's completely crazy. So after the outbreak, there's a document on January 8th, 2020. Dr. Chen emails her senior colleagues at Fauci's agency with the subject line, PRC response to pneumonia cases shows increased transparency over past outbreaks, but gaps in epidemiological data remain. So more transparency, but less transparency. That's a great government document. So this is Chen's email. She writes to her colleagues, hi, here's the cable from the U.S. Embassy Beijing, which means it's a State Department document, reporting on the pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan, China. It has ruled out SARS, MERS, and the flu. Redacted confirmed, so there's a name redacted. It is a viral infection, and there's another redaction. The cable contains SBU information, so sensitive but unclassified. So please don't distribute it widely. So this is a cable she shared with her colleagues from the State Department analyzing and describing China's response to the Wuhan pneumonia, as it was called, that was emerging. The summary of the cable states, and it's worth reading in full because it shows you just how unhelpful China was early on. While PRC, People's Republic of China officials, have released timely and open general information about the outbreak, a lack of epidemiologic data, including an epi curve, a summary of dates of onset of illness, characteristics of infected individuals, and other basic epidemiologic information, hinders better risk assessment and response by public health officials. Again, hinders better risk assessment and response by public health officials. Authorities have also not released information on how they are defining a case. Of course, we had that problem here in the United States too, which is ironic because the CDC is terribly corrupt. Given these gaps in detailed information to date and the lack of a final confirmed pathogen, the risk to the United States and global health is difficult to assess at this time. So listen to that paragraph. The Chinese have generally told us about this Wuhan pneumonia, but they're withholding key data that would help us figure out what the risks are to the American people. As of January 7th, the Wuhan Health Commission has reported 59 local cases of pneumonia with unknown cause. Note, Wuhan, a city of approximately 11 million people, is the capital of central China's Hubei province. According to the Health Commission, some patients are vendors who work in the Huanan seafood market, which also sells live exotic animals, including beavers, snakes, porcupines, and deer. Health officials state there has been no confirmed human-to-human transmission of the disease and no cases among health workers. Laboratory investigations have ruled out influenza, avian influenza, SARS, MERS. I guess the MERS is short for the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and other common respiratory pathogens, and are awaiting final pathogen results. Again, PRC officials on December 31st, 2019, alerted WHO to the pneumonia outbreak. So actually, this email was only a week after it became publicly acknowledged, at least by the Chinese. WHO contacts told embassy officials that PRC health departments continue to provide information about the outbreak in accordance with WHO's international health regulations. While China has been forthcoming with standard information, WHO contacts note they have not received more detailed and potentially useful information, again, such as epi curves or other epidemiological data. The flow of official PRC information on this outbreak is limited to that coming from the Wuhan Health Commission and National Health Commission. So, trouble in China, big trouble. And we're not told about this for 2 years. Now, you may recall that Judicial Watch uncovered shortly after this came out that WHO or one of its subcomponents was trying to put out a press release praising international cooperation on China. And WHO sent an email, or one of the top people there, sent an email to Fauci saying, hey, take a look at this release. We want to send it out. And please note in particular, and I'm paraphrasing since I don't have it in front of me, the special praise we dole out to China here. So China is withholding information, and WHO knows it's withholding information. Fauci's agency knows it's withholding information, and shortly thereafter, they start praising China anyway. You can bet Trump wasn't told this crap. On January 30th, they knew that it was getting worse because Chen, again, Ping Chen, Fauci's person in China, forwards to her colleagues a detailed situation report on the Chinese government responses to the virus that was spreading across the country. So this is less than a month later. So they had travel restrictions, quarantine measures, and all sorts of other things that were taking place in cities across the country, including Beijing and Shanghai and major cities like that. So this is also interesting. On April 15th, 2020, an official whose name is redacted sends an email to colleagues labeled Wuhan Institute of Virology cables. As I'm sure you are quite aware at this point, the cables from a State Department agency wrote on the Wuhan lab and the concerns we had about the findings of the papers on bat coronavirus research has become big news recently. So they all know that there's an issue with Wuhan Institute. Again, these are documents that are only turning over to us now, even though they were created on April 15, 2020. Another major find that we have in these documents is that we were helping Wuhan in all sorts of ways in the years running up to the outbreak of COVID. And we weren't just helping Wuhan, we were providing support to other labs and frankly, similarly dangerous labs all over the world, including in India. An official forwards an email exchange, for instance, in April of 2018, a cable on the Wuhan Institute of Virology visit. China, and this is how the cable begins, the summary. China's Wuhan Institute of Virology, a global leader on virus research, is a key partner for the United States in protecting global health security. Its role as an operator of the just-launched P4 lab, which, as you know, or you may know, means that it's one of the most highly secure labs in terms of its ability to handle the most sensitive pathogens. The first such lab in China opens up even more opportunities for expert exchange, especially in light of the lab's shortage of trained staff. We were staffing Wuhan's lab. Let me say that again. We were staffing and training Wuhan's lab. And we saw this as an arm of the U.S. government for all practical purposes when you look at material like this. How else would you interpret it? The cable also mentions that there is a U.S. Centers for Disease Control supported P4 facility in Pune, India, P-U-N-E. I didn't know that. Did you know that? What are they doing in Pune? I mean, do you trust Fauci's agencies or any of these deep state public health agencies to monitor what these labs are doing? I don't. And they were going to stand up a second lab in Harbin. Now, I've never heard of Harbin, H-A-R-B-I-N. Well, it's another city in China. It's the capital of a major province in northeastern China. And I've seen other documents, and they're all on our website. So we don't hide this from you, the American people, unlike the government. We get these FOIA documents, we put them out there. So sometimes you get people saying, well, Judicial Watch, you can't trust Judicial Watch. How can you not trust us? We put the documents out there. And you can figure it out what they say is just as well as we are able to do. And but the documents that we previously have found shows that we were helping the biological, what I consider to be weapons-oriented research, but they don't want to call it that. But what else would it be there for? They're pretending it's all just civilian research. Do you think the Chinese are doing this for civilian research purposes? I'm sure in part they are. But what else do you think they're doing it for? Defense and offense. But when you look at the funding and look at the scope of our work, I don't even know how the Chinese could have opened up these labs without U.S. taxpayer funding. As I said, they look to be arms of the U.S. government, practically speaking, namely Fauci's agency. The cable notes that Chinese officials described the Wuhan lab as a regional node in the global biosafety system and said it would play an emergency response role in an epidemic or pandemic. So their actual response role turned out to be suppressing information that we needed to figure out what the heck was going on in Wuhan with this COVID lab. And we still don't have the information. I mean, there have been 2 studies that were put out recently, interesting ones, and I encourage you to look them up because believe it or not, I don't necessarily think it's a matter of faith that that we have to believe that this COVID emerged out of a lab versus naturally. So it could be either one. I don't know. And if it is one versus the other, we take steps accordingly. But there are 2 new studies that have come out that suggest they have some data analysis. Again, that isn't perfect because of China's suppression of information that highlight further highlight the possibility that it didn't merge in that area around that wet market that's been famously highlighted. But even they note that they still don't have enough information, although they think their work is persuasive. It continues. Experts from the NIH supported P4 lab at the University of Texas medical branch have trained Wuhan lab technicians in lab management and maintenance, Institute officials said. NIH was a major funding, along with China's National Science Foundation, of SARS research by the Wuhan Institute of Virology's blacked out. Finally, the cable notes, blank with the EcoHealth Alliance, which of course has been linked to this Chinese gain-of-function research that has been largely confirmed by documents uncovered by Judicial Watch. In New York, a New York City-based NGO that is working with the University of California, Davis to manage the blank. Plans to visit Wuhan to meet with Shi Zhengli, who was a major official at Wuhan. And well prior to the outbreak, again, going back another year to 2017, one of Fauci's top people, Gray Hanley, I think he was number 2 at the agency, forwards to colleagues a State Department cable titled China's Interest in the Global Virome Project Presents an Opportunity for Global Health Cooperation. Which another official notes seems relevant to biobanking, IP, which is typically short for intellectual property, pandemic flu, and a bunch of other issue areas. The summary of the cable begins, the proposed Global Virome Project, an international, non-governmental organization built on a decade-long prototype initiated by the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is another agency involved in funding these labs and similar research, seeks to address vulnerability from emerging diseases by creating a global database of viruses of animal origin and identifying those pathogens with greatest potential to jump to humans through sequencing their genomes, understanding the ecology involved in transmission, and assessing risks to humans. This knowledge could then be used to devise treatments and countermeasures. So I suspect that, well, I don't suspect because this is what they say. U.S.-China collaboration on this project is an opportunity to lead innovation in science, collaborate with China, and potentially contribute to scientific breakthroughs. So they were using this project, again, funded largely by the U.S. government, to work with the Chinese, our great friends, the Chinese. That turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes, assuming it was done in good faith, in world history. The records include also an email between the U.S. Embassy in Beijing back again in February 2018, in which NIH officials were monitoring the Chinese media. And some of this we've talked about before. They were looking at highly pathogenic viruses at the Wuhan Institute, so they knew that was happening. A new nanotechnology-based flu vaccine, that sounds interesting, and that's been raised before. China advances in human gene therapy, in which China is helping to advance gene and cell therapy and genome editing research by creating novel viral and non-viral vectors for gene delivery and innovative applications of CRISPR technology in a broad range of disease areas. Boy. Imagine if that was applied to the wrong viruses. So there's a lot here, and forgive me for going through it with you, but you're never going to hear about it unless I tell you about it. Because the media covers this up. Because Fauci covered it up. And they're protecting Fauci. And what's happening is Fauci's agency gets protected, China gets protected, Fauci himself gets protected, but the American people are left in the dark but for Judicial Watch. So as I've been saying on social media this week, I'm tired of the cover-ups. Now, of course, I've been seeing cover-ups for my 24 years here at Judicial Watch. But there are cover-ups, and then there are cover-ups that place the American people's health at risk. And when they're lying for China and protecting China and not pressing China as they should, as we're facing this dangerous pandemic. Now, we can argue about how dangerous it is and what we should have done in response to it, and you know or you should know where I stand on that. But you know, we need the more information, the better. And we're fighting tooth and nail with Fauci to get access to this information. 2 years. And one of the reasons it's been taking so long to get access to this information is because the government has told us that Fauci and his top people review the documents, which is extraordinary. I'm not aware of that happening before in other FOIA litigation that we've been involved with. We've done more FOIA litigation than anyone on the earth. And I've never heard of anything like that happen before. So we're going to keep on keeping on here. But you should know that Fauci's agency is involved in a cover-up of what it knew and when about China's refusal to cooperate with us. And they sat on this material for 2 years. The State Department has also sat on the material, and you wouldn't know it but for your friendly neighborhood Judicial Watch. Well, I have some good news, so I guess I should start smiling, right? We settled a lawsuit with North Carolina to clean up their election rolls because you know why? They cleaned up their election rolls. Judicial Watch is the national leader in making sure that the federal law that requires states to clean up election rolls, take reasonable steps to clean up election rolls, is followed. The Justice Department has been AWOL on that. So Judicial Watch has stepped in and filed historic private lawsuits against states and counties to make sure they're cleaning up their rolls. You may recall that we sued California a few years back and LA County, and they settled with us. And part of the settlement agreement was they were going to take steps to remove up to 1.6 million names from their rolls. We followed up on that litigation with more litigation against Colorado, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. And just this week, we announced a settlement with North Carolina because they did what we asked. They took reasonable steps to clean up election rolls. In fact, according to the records we examined, they removed 430,000 names from the rolls that shouldn't have been there. Remarkable. And of course, that wasn't done until after we sued. So great news. Our elections are going to be markedly cleaner and less susceptible to fraud because of this cleanup in North Carolina. In June of 2019, so just to be clear, we sued North Carolina, and there were two counties that were terrible down there in terms of having dirty election rolls, Mecklenburg and Guilford County. We sued them back in 2020, so it's about 2 years ago. In June 2019, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal agency, released data showing that voter registration rates in significant proportion of North Carolina's counties were close to or above 100% of their age-eligible citizenry. So when you go, just to take a step back, when you got more people on the rolls that are there than are there and eligible to vote, that's a pretty good indication your rolls are dirty. Judicial Watch's analysis also showed that at the time of the report, the entire state of North Carolina had a registration rate close to 100% of its age-eligible citizenry. So, you know, registration rates are a bit higher than they used to be on average, I think. But, you know, mostly registration rates are around 80%, sometimes 85% at the highest end. When you have registration rates at 100% or higher, there's something wrong. They're not cleaning up their lists. So we warned them. They didn't do what we asked them to do, so we sued under the law. And since then, we received additional data from the Election Assistance Commission showing they finally started doing what we sued them to make them do. The total number of inactive registrations, and this is from our settlement filing with the federal court, the total number of inactive registrations reported by North Carolina dropped from about 1.2 million in 2019 to about 765,000 in 2021, a 36% drop. As I said, 430,000 names. The statewide percentage of inactive registrations dropped from 17% in 2019, which the complaint alleged to be a national outlier, to 10% in 2021, which is close to the median state inactive rate. So the point isn't that you can't have voters on the rolls who are inactive, because there are always going to be voters on the rolls that are inactive. But if the percentage of inactive voters, meaning people who haven't voted more or less in the last 2 or more election cycles, are so high, it means you're not cleaning the rolls off. If someone hasn't voted in 6 years and otherwise hasn't communicated that they're still around, you really need to be taking their names off the rolls. And that wasn't going on, it looks like. This is another important step. The number of registrations removed for failure to respond to an address confirmation notice and vote in 2 consecutive elections has increased from about 220,000 for the period reported in 2019 to about 590,000 to the period reported in 2021, a 168% increase. So let me explain what goes on there. You don't vote in an election. What's supposed to happen, at least a federal election, is you should be getting a postcard from your local or state election authority asking, hey, you didn't vote, are you still there? And if they don't hear from you, or you otherwise don't vote in the next 2 federal elections, they are supposed to remove your names from the rolls. So that's like, 4 or 5 years, right? Practically speaking. What's the big whoop about doing that? Well, the left hates the idea that you remove anyone's name from the rolls because, in my view, they want to be able to have extra names on the rolls to mess around with if they need extra improper votes. That's why we're supposed to have clean election rolls. It mitigates the opportunities for fraud. When you have names who are on the rolls who are moved away and shouldn't be there, that is an invitation for fraud. That's why the law requires they be cleaned up. And so after we sued, they went from 220,000 names that they cleaned up to 590,000 names that they cleaned up. Isn't that remarkable? And in the counties, they had a cleanup rate, or the numbers that they cleaned up were increased by 142% in one county and 372% in another county. So that was just great. Now, Judicial Watch isn't like some of these other lawyers out there that just will torture you with a lawsuit when there's no good faith basis to do so. And so what happens is we saw that they cleaned up the rolls. And so what we're going to do? Sue forever over their cleanup? So we saw that they did what we asked them to do, where the numbers were what we wanted them to do, and we determined that in good faith that this legal action shouldn't be pursued. So this is what happened. We sued North Carolina because their rolls were dirty. They started to clean them up in a significant way, and so we stopped the lawsuit. Victory. So this is great. Now our lawsuits against Pennsylvania and Colorado continue. They tried to get the case thrown out in Colorado, but they were unable to do so. And in Pennsylvania, our case has changed a little bit since we initially filed it, but we're still pursuing it because there are many counties in Pennsylvania that still have issues. And I've told you previously here that we just sent out warning letters to additional states, 14 counties, I think, in 5 states, alleging that there were well over 12 million names on the rolls that have not really been scrubbed. No, wait, excuse me. There are 12 million total voter registration names. And of those names, only 33 have been removed over the last 4 years under this process that I've been talking about, under the National Voter Registration Act. When I say 33 names, there should have been hundreds of thousands of names removed if they were doing their job. I think in all of New York City, which has, I don't know how many millions of, you can just imagine the millions of voter registrations in New York City, I think they removed 10 names. It's a disaster. So we're planning additional lawsuits. So this is a big victory for clean elections. I keep on throwing my press releases away before I'm done with them. So this is a big victory for clean elections because dirty election rolls can mean dirty elections. That's why we're doing this work. And now that the left, and with the acquiescence, frankly, of too many Republicans who don't think smartly about this, are greatly expanding vote by mail, it's more important than ever that our election rolls be clean.
Next up, we've gotten some new documents under the Freedom of Information Act from the Consumer Financial Protection Board, which is another monstrosity of a federal agency that talks about microaggressions, which is really left-wing insanity that's designed to divide us by invoking racism in everyday innocent work and personal interactions. And what I'm going to do is highlight for you the document. Well, I'm going to wait for a second to highlight the document. So we had asked for documents from the agency, essentially about CRT. Give us documents about what that shows CRT related training, critical race theory training, which again, is critical race theory. The left like you to pretend that it's just something that happens in law schools. No, as applied in the government and HR departments, it presumes everyone who is not a minority is an oppressor, and everyone who is a minority is a victim, and they should all act as if that's the case. And that innocent comments and interactions that have nothing to do with race should be interpreted as part of systematic racism. And it's essentially Marxist in point in attitude and approach, and seeks to overturn the American system because they think the American system is inherently racist and needs to be remade from the bottom up. And you see that in their analysis of what they call microaggressions, as I said, which are innocent comments that are translated into symbols of racism and oppression, or sexism and oppression. And I'm going to call up the document and share it with you. Let's see if I can, give me a second here, share screen. And let me find the document. Here it is. Share. Okay, so this is the document. And it's from the CFPB, you can see. And it talks about, this is, I scroll down to the page, where it talks about microaggressions. Microaggressions, according to the leftists running the CFPB who created this document, again, your tax dollars at work. Let me get this thing here. Verbal and nonverbal behaviors. So nonverbal behaviors can be racist. Communicate negative, hostile, and derogatory messages to people rooted in their marginalized group membership based on gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, etc. Occur in everyday interactions, can be intentional or unintentional, are often unacknowledged, are often less obvious in nature and more subtle. So you got to realize you're being very subtle here in your racism than outright discriminatory assaults, such as using racial epithets and displaying swastikas. And these can easily turn into unlawful discrimination or harassment. And so, and they talk about stereotypes being the basis of it, and then they have these weird pictures of alleged stereotypes that are thrust upon people of color and marginalized groups. So here you are. This is the victimization of fellow Americans and by other Americans who are their oppressors. This is our government at work. And then they have this crazy cartoon description of what microaggressions are, and they give examples. Where are you from? No, I don't mean New York City. I mean, where are you from? Wow, you speak good English. What are you? You're so interesting looking. Well, that translates according to the message that's received. You are not American. Your ethnic racial identity makes you exotic. You don't belong here. You're a perpetual foreigner in your own country. You have a doctorate. So the assumption is, according to the left, if you ask things like that, people of color are not as intelligent as white people. Of course, they capitalize white, which is racist. Interrupting a person of color in a meeting. Here's what I think. So that's racist. To quote, interrupt someone who is of the wrong race or marginalized group is potentially racism. Also racist is everyone can succeed in society if they work hard enough. So the work ethic is racist. They also think it's racist to say there is only one race, the human race. When it comes to race, I'm colorblind. So when you say that you're colorblind and that you treat people equally, you're being racist. And that you're, quote, expected to assimilate to the dominant culture, and that you're denying a person's race and ethnic experience, denying the individual as a racial cultural being. So if you're against racism, you're racism. I am not a racist. I have several Black friends. Well, that's racist. Don't blame me. I never owned slaves. That's racist. All lives matter. That's racist. As a woman, I know what you go through as a racial minority. I guess a woman is in a marginalized group. Ignoring systemic racism, such as police interactions. That's what you're saying when you say all lives matter. I am immune from racism because I have friends of color. I mean, this is just crazy talk. Don't you agree? Asking someone, why are they so quiet? Don't you have any thoughts to share? Why you have to be so loud? Just calm down. Why do you always have to talk about your culture at work? Well, first of all, who says that anyway? And why do you have to be so loud I mean, that's racist to say, why are you being so loud? Or why are you being so quiet? Obviously, that's not racist, but that's what they say. So I can go on, so forth and so on with this. Calling 911 when you see someone, a Black man, again, capitalized, which is racist, selling cigarettes outside my building. So seeing someone engaged in illegal activity, calling the police on criminal activity is racist. This is your tax dollars at work. These juvenile looking the consequences of microaggression: anxiety, depression, sleep difficulties, diminished confidence, helplessness, loss of drive, weight loss. I mean, it sounds like COVID. Damage to professional relationships, lack of concentration at work, looking for other jobs. I tell you what, when you traumatize individuals, I'm going to shut this down because this is driving me crazy here. So you can see that document. You can get the full document on our internet site at judicialwatch.org. But I don't know about you. I don't want taxpayer dollars being used to propagandize this racist, sexist Marxism on our federal employees. The CFPB is a major government agency that regulates, frankly, in an over-the-top way. It's an Obama-era created agency. Consumer loans, and I'm not a fan of the deep state, but civil servants shouldn't be abused with this racist claptrap that is divisive, that treats certain individuals as inherently racist because of the color of their skin, and others as inherently victimized because of the color of their skin. I want to treat people as human beings. not as cogs in the left wing. It's like it's so demeaning to everyone involved. And we're concerned about the rising communism abroad. Well, what about the communism here at home? This is all, again, repackaged Marxism. It's in our schools, it's in our military, it's in our corporations, and it's in our federal agencies like this. And Judicial Watch is front and center in exposing this, suing to get access to the information, getting information from whistleblowers. I mean, it's bad enough this sort of garbage is being given to adults. This is similar to what children are being forced to learn in too many schools across the country, happening in our military too. And of course, we're defending with civil rights lawsuits those who were targeted and abused and fired by school districts for opposing this type of thing. So we're not only exposing it, but we're defending those being victimized by this crazed Marxist agenda that brooks no opposition.